This is my review of the Redmi 6A. It's a new phone. It was released in the last month. It has all of the features that you'd like from the previous years, like a headphone jack, regular micro USB, not USB-C. But it has some more modern features like a 18:9 aspect ratio and relatively slim bezels. Performance on the whole is pretty good. Let's just start with the thing that I'm least impressed with, which is website performance. So let's go to /dot here. You'll notice that even though it's a Chinese phone, most of the stuff on here is regular Google stuff, like the Google keyboard. Web pages load reasonably fast, but I feel like there's just a little bit of jerkiness. Just not quite as smooth as my Samsung S7. That said, it's perfectly good. You may not use the word butter to describe it, but you wouldn't use the word slow to describe it either. Here's a particularly apropos article given that I'm doing a review here. You can see it loaded perfectly fine. Nice and fast. One thing you'll notice is there's no navigation buttons. That's because there's a feature in the OS to turn those off. In order to go back, what you do is you drag your finger from the edge into the center, and this can be a little tricky to get right. But I've had a week to play around with this, so I've gotten pretty good at it. If you want to go to home, that's easier. Just drag up like that. If you want to see the most recently used applications, you drag up and hold, and there they are. And if you want to close everything, you hit the X. Pretty straightforward. Now, that jerkiness that I was talking about is only visible in web views. If you are looking at the settings, everything's super slick. The specs of this phone are pretty reasonable. One thing that's nice, it's running almost the latest version of Android. It's running 8.1. And it has 2 gigabytes of RAM. The CPU is a 2 gigahertz MediaTek CPU, which is maybe roughly equivalent to a Snapdragon 800, which used to be a pretty fast chip 3-4 years ago. Nowadays, it's just good enough. The internal storage leaves 8 gigabytes of space free before you've installed very much, or really anything, so out of the box. That's not too bad. The theming's a little bit iOS-ish, but once you get down to brass tacks, it's basically straightforward Android, and I kind of like it, actually. They offer some neat features like the aforementioned gesture controls. Let's see what it looks like without the gesture controls. So it's under so-called full screen display. We can go here, and we can go back to regular buttons, and there they are on the bottom of the screen like you'd be used to them. The camera is not the best. And by I mean that, I mean the hardware. The software is perfectly reasonable. If you look at the settings, it actually has a decent number of settings you might want to change. I won't bother to read these, but you can just sort of look at them and see that they've definitely biased this skin towards more customization rather than less. It also has one feature that I really think is pretty cool, which is it shows the bandwidth that's being used in real time while you're using the phone. So you can see, even though I'm just sitting here in the camera mode, there is actually some data being pushed and pulled around. So that's kind of nice if you're paying by the megabyte for your data. So I'll show some example photos that I took and compare them side by side with other cameras. So here is a photo from an outside shot with reasonably full sunlight, and you can see I've got 3 cameras here, the Redmi 6A in the center and a Samsung S7 and an LG Stylo 3. They all look okay, but the Redmi clearly the least good of the set. It's just a little blurrier, but it's tolerable. I should note these are full crops. In other words, I've zoomed these in about 2.5x so that the pixels shown on the screen are the full resolution of the sensor. So these are going to show the sensor at its worst. If you zoom out all the way and view the photos like you would on your smartphone, like this photo or this photo, things look much better. Of course, if you're really taking photos with your smartphone that you want to save, you'll be interested in seeing what the cropped in images look like. So here's another one. This is an indoor shot. And you can see that with moderate lighting it does okay, but not as good as the comparison. And then here's another one. This is a real low light. This is very dim. And here you can see that the S7, which of course was a flagship phone in 2016, the S7 is doing way, way better than the 6A. Even another budget phone, the LG Stylo 3, does better than the 6A. So to conclude, the camera is okay, but certainly not a strong point. Let's look at the benchmark results. I did this earlier so we can just see how it performs rather than waiting for it to happen in real time on the screen. These numbers are reasonable, again, more or less comparable to a Snapdragon 800. Compared to a more modern CPU like the Snapdragon 430, it's a little bit better, a little bit worse, depending on what you're talking about. They give you a file manager, which I think is really a necessary feature, and it's kind of stupid, I think, that Google doesn't provide that functionality. You can see I don't really have any files, so there's not much to manage here, but that's because I deleted everything before starting this video. So I used this to make some phone calls using T-Mobile, and I found the performance perfectly reasonable, nice and loud actually. I did not find that the mobile web performance was as good. It was tolerable. I think that may be because it doesn't have as many bands as a usual domestic phone would have. This was really made for the Chinese market first and foremost, and the international market second most. So it doesn't have necessarily all the GSM bands that a typical American phone would have. That said, it worked fine. It doesn't support Sprint or Verizon, only GSM providers. The YouTube performance is perfectly good. I don't know what the sense of showing actual YouTube video on a YouTube video. One thing that's sort of interesting is if you go into full screen mode here, and I won't play it with volume, you can see that there's little borders here and here. That's because this phone is taller than a standard 16:9 video. You're going to lose a little bit of screen real estate when you're watching videos compared to a more traditional aspect ratio. That means that this phone, at least for watching videos, is the same size as just a 5-inch LCD. So to summarize, I think performance is perfectly reasonable. The interface is perfectly nice. It's a nice lightweight phone. It is made of plastic, but hey, there's nothing wrong with that. I think the biggest criticism is the camera, but for $100, that's probably what you would expect. And the second biggest criticism is that it's not the fastest, but gosh, a few years ago this would have been a flagship, I think. So you really can't criticize it that much.